what Jung said happened in Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s was Ergriffenheit. They were possessed by Wotan. He looked at what was going on in Hitler's time, and Hitler stepped into the need that the Germans had and was their Führer, their leader, their savior, and they became possessed. And the word that Jung used when he wrote about it, his Wotan essay in 1936, was Ergriffenheit, possession. So you're in a state of possession by the archetypal energies behind the image, and they're very powerful, and they form groups. And once you're in the group, group reinforces it, and then you have the parades, and you have the rallies and the music and all of that, and it's very, very strong drink, intoxicating. Yeah.
Murray Stein, welcome back to the podcast. Great to see you.
Great to see you again, Brian. My pleasure.
Yeah. It's nice and early in the morning here on the west coast of Canada, and you're currently in Zurich. So late afternoon for you?
4 o'clock, yes. Not late, but getting late.
Yeah. We're here to talk about another book that you've released. I mean, I can't believe how much you've put out, and how much you're still working with the ideas of Jung. And this new book is an introduction to Jung's work on alchemy. Mm-hmm. Why did you think a short book, an introduction on alchemy, was needed?
I don't know. I don't know that it's needed, but it was interesting to put it together. It's based on lectures that I've given over the years on several different occasions. Somebody taped them for me and made a transcript, and I started working on it and gradually developed the 6 chapters that are in this book. But the interest in Jung's alchemy has been with me, for many, many years. I think it's some of the finest work he did. It's late work. It's very important psychological interpretations of this esoteric tradition. Very meaningful to Jung. Obviously, he gave it extremely a lot of his time in his last 20, 25 years of active writing and thinking. So it was a pleasure for me to write it. It's not a big book, it's introductory, but I try to cover some of the basic features of Jung's writings on alchemy. It's not about alchemy, it's about Jung's writings on alchemy, which is different. Jung studied alchemy. I haven't really studied alchemy in the original languages. You have to know Latin and Greek, and if you can, Arabic. Jung didn't know Arabic, but he knew Latin and Greek well, and he had people around him who could help him with the translations if he needed translation. So he really delved into the original materials and put his stamp on alchemical studies, not as a historian of alchemy. That's not what he was. He was mining alchemy for psychology. He was looking at psychological features and processes and symbols that he found so fascinating and valuable for his work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's interesting that it's not so much about what the alchemists say about alchemy, but the interest is on how Jung interpreted and appropriated alchemy for his depth psychology.
Exactly.
Yeah, you write about why alchemy was so kind of important for Jung, and part of that was finding a historical foundation or precedent for his depth psychology.
Well, it's complex. I asked my friend Nathan Schwartz a lot years and years ago. He's now passed away, sadly. who he also was very interested in Jung's writings on alchemy and wrote a couple of books using alchemical works of Jung. What he thought, why was Jung so interested in it? And he had a very short answer. He said it's because it's a transformation process.
Mm-hmm.
And in a nutshell, that answers it, I think. What Jung found in the alchemical philosophy and writings was a transformation process from the base to the noble metals, or the base to the noble parts of the self. And transformation was an interest of his from at least 1910, 1911 on, when he wrote his first major work, what's now titled Symbols of Transformation. The original was Symbole und Wandlungen der Libido, Symbols and Transformations of the Libido. This was still in his Freudian phase, just before he broke from Freud. And the book really was a blow to their relationship because Freud didn't appreciate it. And Jung was differing from some of his views, although he was still quite Freudian at that time. But this topic of transformation was of intellectual interest to him because he was engaged in psychoanalysis. He was working with patients, and he thought it was important for them to change some of their basic attitudes, their way of seeing life and living life, and experiencing themselves, and the whole attitude that one takes toward human life. So transformation was a topic, and then he had his own transformation experience. And this began when he broke from Freud, and he said he asked himself, well, now what am I going to do? What is my myth to live by? And he couldn't answer the question because he had left Freudianism, which had been a kind of myth for him, at least a guide to his thinking and work. Freud was the great teacher, and he admired Freud a great deal, Freud's genius. And now he'd lost Freud, so that was an absence. He lost a positive connection to his religious tradition, Christianity. He grew up in a Christian home. His father was a pastor. His grandfather was a famous pastor in Basel. He had 6 uncles who were ministers. So he grew up in a very religious, Christian, Reformed family. But that was not something that gripped him anymore. It wasn't his myth to live by. Also, he was reading Nietzsche. And Nietzsche was also a pastor's son who had fallen out of the faith and invented his own new faith. Also sprach Zarathustra, thus spake Zarathustra, in which Nietzsche found a way to live without faith. How do you live without faith? And Nietzsche found his way to that. And Jung needed to find his way to that. In the end, Jung's way is very different from Nietzsche's, but they face a very similar, if not identical, issue. God is dead. Now what? How do we orient ourselves? What's our North Star? How do we find our way? Tolstoy faced the same problem at midlife. He asked himself, is life just totally meaningless? I don't have a theory. I can't answer the question. And Tolstoy found his way, Nietzsche found his way, and Jung found his way. So alchemy was a very important part of explaining what he had found. It wasn't that in alchemy he found his way, but he found alchemy was a way of talking about what had happened to him in his transformation process and what was continuing to happen to him as he aged, in metaphorical terms, symbolic terms, and experiential terms. what what fascinated Jung about alchemy was that it wasn't just theology. It wasn't theologians sitting in a study, reading books and pasting together their commentaries and so on, which he knew all about. He read a lot of that. But it was about experiencing something. Alchemy was experiential. And Jung was basing himself now not on literature and texts and metaphors from the tradition, but on experience. And he had the experience in the Red Book phase of his life from the age about 37, 38 it began, and it lasted until he was almost 50. And then he found a link to alchemy after his experience. So alchemy was a way of talking about his experience, or as he would say, amplifying his experience, putting it into a context. Because Jung also felt this is really weird what I'm doing. Has anybody else ever done something like this? He knew Nietzsche, and he was not a particular admirer of Nietzsche, and he dreaded the fate that Nietzsche suffered, going mad at the end of his life, and, basically unable to function for the last 10 years of his life due to some unknown illness. Nobody's really sure what it was, but Jung feared a kind of mental breakdown.
Right. Sorry to interrupt, but when you're talking about no one's ever done this, he's talking about his work with what he came to call active imagination, these dialogues with inner figures.
Yeah.
And I guess you could say Thus Spake Zarathustra was one long active imagination that Nietzsche engaged in with this figure. Is that right?
It's right and it's not right. Well, Jung's criticism of Nietzsche was that Nietzsche got caught up in an identification with an
Right.
archetypal figure. So when you read Zarathustra, you don't hear Nietzsche engaging Zarathustra in conversations. You hear Zarathustra speaking.
Right.
Where is
Yes.
Nietzsche? Where is the author? When you read the Red Book, the author is all over the place. The author is fully engaged. The author
Right.
never leaves the page.
So there's that healthy detachment there, avoiding identification with the
That's right.
figure, which
Yeah.
can lead to inflation, grandiosity, etc.,
Because
madness.
you lose your ego functions. You lose who you are. You lose your history. So he did this. Could see it was different from Nietzsche's. He avoided the trap very carefully. I mean, he's very, very careful to keep a distance from the figures and to engage them, but not to identify with them. A couple of times he gets very close. But what he felt was he's doing this and he sees his patients now doing it. He introduced them to active imagination after he had the experience, probably starting around 1916, 17. And they were busy doing active imagination. His wife was doing it. Emma was doing it. We can read now that a book has been published about Emma Jung this year that includes her notebooks and diaries. And you can see that while Jung was doing it, she was also doing it. So he had people around him who were doing this, but he wanted to know, is there historical preference? Does this link to anything in the past, importantly, that people have done as spiritual, psychological work, the opus, as the alchemists called it?
Right.
And he discovered alchemy through a chance encounter with a Chinese alchemy text that his friend Richard Wilhelm translated from the Chinese into German and sent him a copy and asked for a commentary in 1928. And Jung started reading that and he said, "Oh my God, these are my brothers. This is what they were doing in their meditations. They're doing exactly what I've been doing." And so he found this, you could say, brotherhood of or kinship group of people
Right.
who
Or
are doing
like a spiritual
precisely that kind of
lineage
work.
kind of thing,
Spiritual lineage,
like
exactly.
the
That's what
Chinese
he was
Taoists.
looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was important for Jung to find a Western precedent for his work, right?
That's right. So that's why I started studying Western alchemy. So the beginning was Chinese. And what he says that did for him was to tell him that the process that he was experiencing was not limited to culture, language, um, epoch, time, place. It was universal. It gave him the feeling that there's something archetypal going on in this process that we can call transformation. And that was a big breakthrough. And then he writes a lot about that. And what individuation is, which is his term for this development. Individuation is the realization of the self in a person's life. The self is what's individuating,
Hmm.
and the ego is included in that process. The ego is a part of it, but the ego isn't the maker of it. The ego isn't the creator of it. The ego can participate in it and observe it, accept it, reject it. It's very important that the ego stays grounded and interacts with what's going on, but it's the self that's doing it. And this feeling that developed that he was participating in something greater than his ego self, but that included his ego self, was, I think, like a revelation to him, like a divine revelation. An angel came and showed him something, like in the book of Revelation, the angel opens the window to what's going on in the invisible world and shows it to John. That's a revelation, an unveiling, a revealing of something that's hidden. And so now
Right.
Jung
Like
had
an apocalypse.
an apocalypse. Yeah,
Right. And you could look at his descent into the unconscious during the Red Book years as a kind of apocalypse, like not something you want to sign up for necessarily,
yeah.
right? So saying like that, it's not like in the ego's best plan to go through this kind of event, but it
It certainly
happens.
wasn't in Jung's plan. When he started it, it was an experiment because he had been writing about the fantasies of an American named Frank Miller, a woman named Frank, strange, Miss Miller. And in the Symbols of Transformation book, um, uh, when it was first translated, it was called The Psychology of the Unconscious. So that's the first version. He was interpreting her fantasies, and he saw, and then he started making all kinds of associations to her fantasies. He saw that some of the figures could be linked to mythological figures from many traditions, not only American, Indian tradition, Hiawatha, and so on, he goes into, but also Far Eastern traditions and Egyptian traditions and old European traditions. And so he started having this sense that our fantasy life is connected to something that we're not aware of in the background. So you have a fantasy, or you make a big projection. There are people now who consider Donald Trump to be a savior figure. That's a huge archetypal projection, but the savior figure is universal. You find it in many cultures and many times and places, and it pops up every now and then, and people get hooked into it, and they can't think their way out of it. They get identified with it. So, what's going on in the background of our fantasies and projections is something invisible that's much larger than what we see on the material plane. Because it looks, if you're not in the myth and you look at people who are, they look crazy.
Hmm.
What are you talking about?
Like that guy?
That guy, that idiot. But if you get into their shoes and look at it from their perspective, you start seeing what they're seeing, an archetypal projection, and it can be very convincing and very gripping, and introduce the whole element of faith. You have to have faith in the leader, and this has popped up in history many times. Stalin was considered the father of the Russian people, father. A father figure is an archetypal figure. He's one who takes care of you. He's one who provides. He protects you. He looks out for you. You have to support the father. And that's what I think Trump is to a lot of people. He's going to protect us from these insidious elements that are coming in from outside, from Canada and other places.
What? Not us. No. Yeah, but not Canadians. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that the archetypal understanding or theory gives you is that deeper look at what's going on. And for me, that helps me remain more balanced, equanimous, kind of outside of it, not getting caught by it. That's so helpful. And also, what it also gives me is a sense of compassion for people who are ensnared by an
Yeah,
archetype.
that's right.
Like I can understand why you would want a savior right
Yeah,
now. The world's
exactly.
burning, everything's like collapsing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I want a savior. I want Big Daddy to come along and kind of like protect me and carry me along.
yes, absolutely. It responds to a need. There is a rule that when an archetypal image is needed, one will appear.
Hmm.
So the hero figure appears during times of need. Somebody steps forward and plays the role of the hero, and then the others follow. Um, so the need is certainly there. This is what Jung said about the birth of Christ, as a savior figure. It was the result of a projection of the people who had been waiting for a savior for centuries. And now here was one who matched the template, who matched the image that they'd been looking for.
Right, he fit the bill.
Yeah, he fit the bill. So there is a need and there is a response from the psyche to that need. But as you say, if you have some theory, this is the value of the theory, uh, you're not as likely to get caught in it. Even if you have the feelings and the need, you can step back a bit and say, oh, that's interesting. Uh, you can kind of watch it, and you can watch others getting caught in it, and you can step out of it. But while you can appreciate it at the same time, but you aren't as hooked. You aren't as what Jung said happened in Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s was Ergriffenheit. They were possessed by Wotan. He looked at what was going on in Hitler's time, and Hitler stepped into the need that the Germans had and was their Führer, their leader, their savior, and they became possessed. And the word that Jung used when he wrote about it, his Wotan essay in 1936, was Ergriffenheit, possession. So you're in a state of possession by the archetypal energies behind the image, and they're very powerful, and they form groups. And once you're in the group, group reinforces it, and then you have the parades, and you have the rallies and the music and all of that, and it's very very strong
Mhm.
uh, drink, intoxicating. Yeah.
There's a quote in the book that I think I really liked. It really helped me understand, because I thought like there's probably a lot of reasons why Jung was drawn to alchemy. Like he was looking at all of these different comparative religions and spiritual traditions and seeing the practices, which we don't have so much in the Western tradition. There's a long history of Western philosophy that he was engaged with from a young age.
Mhm.
But it's that movement, and there's a great image in the book of the alchemists. There's one tending the fire in the furnace, and then
Mhm.
kind of behind him, there's some alchemists in the library who are kind of discussing ideas. And you talk
Mhm.
about this movement from the library to the laboratory, and that movement back and forth that
Mhm.
you alluded to before that was important to Jung to have a practice. Okay, ideas are great, but we need a practice.
Yeah.
And it was important for him to have a Western practice. He thought that it was problematic for people to try to enter into Eastern practices, and that's one of the reasons why he thought that Christianity didn't stick, was because it was an import from the East. So he finds alchemy, and there's a sense that there's a practice there. But there's also what, like a great repository of images that describe a transformational process in stages.
Mhm.
And what I like how Hillman talks about it, that the alchemical images, they're material images,
Mhm.
but they're images that resist us taking them literally because of their strangeness. And I really like that. It took me a while to kind of get that, but I think that's really true. Is there, we're talking about vessels and waters and fire and fuel for the fire and all of these very tangible material things that we can understand and relate to. But then they're in this very strange context, and they're used for very unconventional purposes, let's say. So it resists us taking it literally, which is really helpful, right?
Yeah, that I don't know how literally the alchemists took it. If you uh, Jung makes a distinction between two types of alchemists: the ones who really wanted to make gold to get rich, and they worked for kings. Kings wanted gold so they could pay their armies and assert their power. So there are those types of alchemists, and it was very material and very literal. I mean, they were in it for the literal transformation of lead or whatever prima materia they could gather into something very valuable that could be sold or could be used to heal and make them famous as doctors. And then there were the alchemists who were in it for what they called not literal gold, but our gold, or the stone that is not a stone, lithium u lithium, something like that.
Oh, and there's gold that is not gold too, like
Yeah,
aurum, not
arum
aurum, or
bonarum.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it was a symbolic gold. And
Right.
so they knew that they were doing something of spiritual value, and they were more into it for that. They experienced a process. And when they talked about gold, um, what did they have in their hand, or the lapis philosophorum? What did they have in their minds? They didn't have. They might have a literal stone, like I've got a little stone on my desk here. I can carry that around in my pocket and rub it, and it gives me some magic and power if I believe in it. But what did they have? I think what they had was a uh, something that is very highly valued in the East, uh, enlightenment. They had a kind of vision of uh, values and human life and significance and meaning that sustained them. Like gold doesn't rust, gold doesn't get corroded. It has a kind of immortality. So when they speak
Right.
about things like immortality and gold and all of that, it's um, not exactly metaphor, but it's symbolic. There's a difference between metaphors and symbols in my mind. Metaphors are kind of mental tricks, or um, what there can be a very superficial way of using metaphors. Memes are metaphors, and um, it's a quick way of speaking or making something look a little more interesting, but it doesn't go very deep. When Jung spoke about symbols, he said it's the best possible expression for something that is unknown, still unknown. So he looked on, for instance, Christ as a symbol. And once it becomes known and you've interpreted it and you've theologized it and you've turned it into intellectual matter, it goes into the library on your shelf and you're done with it. So it loses its numinous power.
Hmm.
If you hold it as a symbol, then it carries this numinous kind of magical quality. And what Jung suggested actually is if when you do active imagination, like the alchemists, it's active imagination what they were doing, and you come upon something, maybe from a dream, and then you work it some more in your alchemical imagination, and you come up with a fairly stable image. He suggests you do something with it, like paint it or give it some concrete form.
Hmm.
He did a lot of sculpture, wood carving. Um, he made the orphan stone at Bowling, and he built the house Bowling, and that was a symbolic space. And then you carry that with you, or you can use that to remind you of the symbol. It takes you back to the symbolic experience. So and he says uh, he doesn't want to talk too much about it. In a couple of sentences in one of his texts, he says it even sometimes has the ability to create synchronicities, which is a kind of magic. That if you say you make a painting from your active imagination and you put it over your desk or you show it to somebody, it can have a kind of magical effect and create a synchronicity. Something valuable for your life, something meaningful. So
Hmm.
these
Yeah.
symbols are very powerful in his mind. Um, he doesn't take them literally, but he doesn't take them metaphorically either. There's something else
Hmm.
that he calls true imagination. It works with what he calls subtle bodies. And I
Young
think
getting
Jim
metaphysical.
Hillman had an appreciation of that, I think. He didn't talk too much about it. He stuck more with the power of metaphor. And I think he didn't like the word symbol. I love the word symbol uh, because it does carry this much stronger psychic meaning.
Hmm.
Uh, and so this intermediate reality that he talks about is subtle bodies are brought into play during true imagination, he says. He says, when God imagines, this I write about this in the book. This is in one of his alchemy texts in volume 12. When God imagines, uh, reality appears, material reality appears. God imagines the sun and the moon, and there they are. So God's imagination has the power to create material objects. There's something about God's imagination that vibrates, uses energy in such a way that the energy can coagulate into objects, has that much power.
Hmm.
Okay. When humans imagine something, he says, they create subtle bodies. These aren't material bodies, but they occupy an intermediate realm. They're not material and they're not material. They're in between.
Hmm.
And I think Jung, when he went out to Bowling and lived in this kind of subtle body symbolic world, there are stories about him out there uh, that when he was cooking, he would speak to the pots and pans.
Hmm.
He thought they liked to be attended to, and he was their friend, and they had conversations. Or he would take food out for the animals, for the fish, his leftover porridge, and give it to the fish, and they would come and they would eat it. And he lived in this kind of one world, unus mundus, when he was out at Bowling. And it's material, but it's also imaginal.
Hmm.
It's that combination or what he calls intermediate space. And he loved to be out there. He said, when I'm at Bowling, and I feel most myself, most at home.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
he steps out of the bourgeois world where he had a very nice house, he had a family, friends, and in this other space, it's very different.
He could be fully
It's symbolic.
himself.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, you're talking about true imagination, and this is a term that comes from the alchemists,
Yeah.
correct? Like they were distinguishing between true imagination and like you could call it fantasy.
Trivial fantasy. Yeah.
Can you just kind of lay that out for people? Because I think that's really interesting and really helpful in understanding Jung and
Yeah.
active imagination and this subtle body.
There's a big difference. When you experience fantasy, generally you're very passive, and it's a kind of wish fulfillment. You have a fantasy about, you see a beautiful woman on the street, and you have a fantasy about having a relationship with her, and you can take that fantasy into all kinds of directions and have fun with it. Um, uh, so fantasy is a product of more or less our conscious mind playing with images and entertaining us, and it has a kind of trivial meaning. We talk about wish fulfillment, um, and you aren't seriously engaged in it. I mean, you can break it off in a minute and go back to your business and forget about it. Now, true imagination is a very different experience because um, you aren't making it up. You aren't generating it. You have to invite it to begin with. You have to open yourself to it.
Hmm.
But when images appear, if it's true imagination, they have their own life. They're autonomous.
Hmm.
So you're not in control of them. If you have the fantasy of that woman on the street and you take it into active imagination, you might find that she has a mind of her own. She
Right.
doesn't just do whatever you want her to, you know.
Yeah, right.
That's what happened to Jung when he first experienced the feminine, the anima, in the Red Book. He writes about. It writes about it. He's in the desert and he's waiting, waiting, nothing's happening, and then he hears a voice, and then she appears, and it's a feminine figure, and he wants to go and wants her to comfort him. He wants to put his head in her lap, and she says, "Wait, stop! I'm not your mother. I'm not going to do this for you. Grow up."
So great.
So fantasy is childish and active imagination is grown up, you could say. And it's a serious enterprise. If you really do it, and what I suggest if people want to learn to do it and have the experience is that you do it for 30 days in a row, and you will have something that's stable and that you can work with for probably the rest of your life. It has a very strong sustainability to it. Um, these figures that appear out of out of the darkness or just come to you. Elijah and Salome came to Jung. Philemon came to Jung. Isdabar, they appear, and then he engages them and he works with them and he takes them very seriously.
Mhm.
And when he tries to dismiss them, and he says to Elijah, "Oh, I'm tired of you now. I'm tired of
I'm
this
done with
world.
you.
You're nothing but symbols." And Elijah looks at him and says, "You may call us symbols if you want, but we're as real as anybody you know." So the symbol has a reality. Jung talks about the reality of the psyche. That's what he means.
Mhm.
That when this hidden part shows up and reveals itself, and you have an apocalypse, um, then you're bound to remember it and take it seriously because it affects you so deeply.
Mhm.
It has transformative energy. It changes you. That's that's a part of the alchemical process that the unconscious figures have an effect on the ego. They can have too much of an effect on the ego, as Jung says about Nietzsche, that when
Mhm.
he saw Zarathustra appeared to him at midday and he was overwhelmed. It had a huge effect on him and he became totally possessed by it. And over the course of the next years wrote Zarathustra, which is a masterpiece. It's one of the great works of German literature. Everybody admires it in the German studies departments. but nobody really takes that too seriously.
Mm,
Uh, it's literature. It's a literary
right.
work. I think Nietzsche took it seriously. I think it was very important for him. I think it affected him deeply. Um, and if people want to take it that way as a kind of biblical revelation, it will probably affect them as well. There's a very strong message in Zarathustra. If you really study Nietzsche's work, the gay
Yeah.
science and Zarathustra, it can affect you very deeply. Literature is very powerful.
Hmm.
And if you read it deeply, as my teacher Harold Bloom at Yale taught us to do deep reading,
Mm.
um, it has a profound effect on your life and your thinking, your feeling, much like active imagination.
Oh,
I
yeah.
find
I see such a
Dante's very
parallel
important.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know that you had studied with Harold Bloom. Wow. Yeah. Um, I'm reading a lot of Cormac McCarthy right now, and
Oh,
Harold Bloom was a big fan
big
of
fan of, big
McCarthy,
fan.
and
Yeah.
saw all the literary allusions that McCarthy was making and showing, kind of revealing the depth of
Yeah.
like what was in the background of McCarthy's westerns, right? Or,
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, I think about that a lot. How literature is a kind of a journey into another world, into
Yeah.
another experience. And when you're speaking about why the true imagination is important and the life that these inner figures have, I think about something that Hillman talked about as kind of reimagining the self as the interiorization of a community, and that this inner community is populated by not just people from our biographical life, but also people that we've met through literature and
Mhm.
imagination, movies, reading about historical figures that seem like some kind of spiritual ancestor for us, or
Mhm.
that, and so yes, these figures do remain alive in some kind of subtle realm. The mundus imaginalis, perhaps, is a good metaphor. This in
Mhm.
between, between the highest realm and the material realm, where they exist and continue to live out and accompany us in our life. And I think that's one of the great values of this kind of work, of allowing these figures into our inner world, is then we're never alone.
It's interesting which ones appear. When you
Hmm.
when you read Jung's Red Book, it's like you're reading his library in a way. The
Yeah.
figures who come to him are not personal figures at all. They're figures he's read about. Elijah and Salome are biblical figures. Izdubar is a representation of Gilgamesh. See, so these Philemon is represents Simon
Simon Magus, or
Magus, Simon the
yeah.
magician. Yeah, so on. So it's he's internalized. But why did his psyche pick these figures and not others? I've had the same experience in my active imaginations and in dreams. You read about many figures, they impress you, but only certain ones come to you in your inner work.
Yeah, and only some of them stick around.
Some of them
You may
stick
get
around.
visited once by a figure, but then some of them, they stick around.
Why?
They won't let go of me. Yeah, I
Why?
know.
Why?
You tell me, Murray, come on.
Okay. It's because they're part of you. They're part of
Yeah.
your identity, the way the others aren't. The others, it might be like neighbors, but these are your family. The ones that stick with you are the ones that are very much a part of your larger identity, the self. I've been thinking about identity quite a bit lately. And, when we use the word identity, it's often in a kind of trivial sense as persona, psychosocial identity, who you are to other people, your social identity. But there's another kind of identity, which is based on the self
Hmm.
that emerges. And I wrote about that in a much earlier book called transformation, emergence of the self. And I wrote about artists and their self-portraits, Picasso and Rembrandt, and the poet Rilke, and also Jung. And this emerges, and these figures that appear in the course of your life as figured as formative and influential are a part of your, you could say, your inner family, your ancestry.
Hmm.
And they belong to you in a way that the others don't. The others are very interesting and moving, but these, for some reason, as you say, stick. They stick with you.
Yeah, and the way I think of it is I belong to them,
Yeah,
actually. It
yeah.
doesn't feel like they belong to me.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I that's interesting. I'm going to check out that earlier book because it's something I've come to in the work that I do with people, and I've been calling it finding your mythopoetic identity, which is kind of like gathering up all of these
Yeah.
figures that speak to you that are somehow like meaningful to you, even if it's unknown. Like why this figure? Why this figure? Why does he keep coming back?
Yeah.
But
You
that makes
gravitate
up,
to certain figures too in what you read,
yeah.
what guides your reading. There's something sort of intuitive about it. Something draws you to this book or that book, and then it takes hold. McCarthy is your man right now.
Yeah, he's grabbed me for sure. There's something,
Yeah.
and like all summer long, I've been kind of in this Western mode,
Mm.
where watching old Westerns, it just feels right. Like I'm kind of in this whole vibe that he evokes in his books.
Somebody asked me recently, has anybody have Jungians written about cowboys and the Wild West as archetypal? I mean, we can speak about it, but I couldn't think of a text that somebody has actually written a book or a monograph. But really interesting.
Mm.
Definitely in American culture, the cowboy. My hero from childhood is the Lone Ranger, and Tonto, and yeah,
Yeah, well, definitely something interesting there, and I think McCarthy would be a good study because he does break apart the kind of the idyllic view of the cowboy and the frontier in the West, and he shows its very dark underbelly, which was kind of very
shadow,
Jungian. Yeah,
the shadow side of it. Yeah,
yeah, revealing the shadow, especially in Blood Meridian. Oof,
yeah.
devastating.
Couldn't read it. I tried.
I tell you, I tried to read it again last year and I couldn't do it. It wasn't the right time. I wasn't kind of I don't know. I think you have to be in a certain kind of mode to be able to enter into that book and survive it. And
Yeah.
something about this year, I went back to it and I kind of waded in. I dipped my toes in. I said, okay, now's the time. And I was able to dive in and kind of keep myself together while I was in
Good for
there,
you.
I mean, there's so much that we could speak about, but I was hoping in maybe the little bit of time that we have left. Well, we don't have much time, so I don't want to get into maybe all of the kind of images and symbols of the alchemical process and how they relate to depth psychology. I'm kind of more interested, like where this conversation has taken us into this. Identity formation, finding a kind of historical background for adept psychology, finding a practice to enact the the philosophy or the ideas. What else? I mean, what's coming to you in terms of like what's relevant to this conversation now? Anything?
Um, well, what Jung thought was the most important thing about alchemy was that it was an attempt to unify the opposites that the alchemists identified as sun and moon or king and queen, that Jung would identify as conscious and unconscious. And his great summary statement of all this is volume 14 of the collected works, Mysterium Conjunctionis, which was his last big book and his capstone to his alchemical work. It's the chapter, I write about it in chapter 6 in my book. And um, he thought that if someone did this opus, as the alchemist showed the way in the various stages, there is a process of separation, there is a process of integration, separating from former identities and attachments, and joining what they called soul and spirit, which is a kind of transcendent view of your life, or a kind of stepping back and seeing yourself in a more objective perspective, not being so identified with your body and your own material needs and wishes and desires, to pull the soul out of that context and connect it to what they called spirit, which is logos and meaning, understanding. And then to reunite that combination, once that's formed, that's what we do in analysis, by the way. We do a lot of that, that separating from trauma and experience and attachments, and looking at it from a more, you could say, psychological standpoint. Then coming back into the body with that, which means embodying that, or coming into the marketplace with it, as I write about in relation to the Zen pictures, the Oxfording pictures.
Mm-hmm.
After you've had the experience, coming back into the world and living it. And that union of what they called unio mentalis in the body is a transformed life, as you live it in the everyday world. And then they go on to a third stage, which is to unite that with what they call the unus mundus. And this is the kind of the final expression of the mysterium conjunctionis, which is to unite the individual with the universal, to unite with all that is, to realize that you're connected to everything that is. You're a particle of energy in a vast ocean of energy. Not to lose yourself in that, but to realize that you're related and connected to this all. But not only the all of the material world, the plants and the animals, all that's important for ecology for sure, but with the all of the metaphysical or spiritual world. And that is, I think, represented by Dante in his great poem, Paradiso, where in the last canto, 100th canto of the book, he has an experience. It's more than a vision. It's actually an experience. And he says, I can't even speak about it. It's beyond words, in which he felt that he became one with the love that moves the sun and all the other stars. What is that? That's God. Becoming one with that type of energy that he calls love. That's not romantic love. That's not what he felt for Beatrice or any of his girlfriends. It's the love that moves the sun and all the stars. And so that becoming one, that's what the alchemists would mean by unus mundus, the energy that holds the whole thing together, not just the material world, but the cosmos and all that is.
Mm. And it's also something of the why, why it all exists, why we exist as 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 kind of Homo aestheticus, like here to appreciate the
Yeah,
world and to kind of reflect the beauty of the world through our art making. Why do we stand up and why do we have these opposable thumbs? I think it's not as simple as like being able to grab more bananas or to turn sticks into tools. I think it's to turn sticks into to pencils and paintbrushes, because monkeys do pretty well without opposable thumbs and getting around and all of that.
Yeah.
But this kind of fine dexterity allows us to maybe reflect better the beauty of the world
And language,
in language. Yeah.
what we're doing now. And
All this, just communicating in metaphors. It's all we
yeah,
do all the time.
that's right.
The poetic basis of
Words,
mind.
words.
Yeah, that's
Well,
great. And
the alchemists
yeah,
went between the library and the laboratory, and that's also Jung's message. You have to have experience. That's the laboratory, and you have to think about it and write about it and reflect on it and exchange with other people about it. And it's that back and forth, I think, that produces the best results. It isn't
hmm
something just to do totally on your own, but you're in a community of people in a library, other thinkers and history, and Jung felt it was so important to make a connection between modern depth psychology and history, ancient history, and alchemy was the link to Gnosticism and the deep past and the biblical times and so on. So it's a modern expression of something very ancient.
yeah, and you write in the book, you can't have a depth psychology without deep history.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and kind of deep ancestral roots in terms of finding your spiritual ancestors in this kind of spiritual lineage. For Jung, it was like Goethe, Paracelsus, Nietzsche, probably all the way back to Simon Magus or and beyond.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
How is it? I mean, obviously, Jung, as James Home would say, Jung is on your tree, and maybe a kind of central trunk on that tree, would you say?
Yeah, I would say so. A very central one. Mhm.
I mean, it just amazes
Been at
me.
this for about 56 years.
Yeah.
I counted the other day. Yeah.
I find that just amazing. And in the book, you write that you've had meetings with some of your colleagues over a decade, speaking, every week about Mysterium Conjunctionis.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I mean, to stay that kind of enthralled by a work and that there's still more there, there's more depth.
Always more there. Always more there. And look at the footnotes. Read the footnotes.
Yeah, maybe in year 5 you can actually get around to the footnotes, after you've looked up all the terms and everything else.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you. I was telling my wife the other day that I was going to be speaking with you, and she was talking about having listened to years ago your excellent lectures on the Chicago Jung Institute website. I think they
Oh,
go
yeah.
back to like the early 90s. So,
Yes. That's right.
30 some odd years ago, you were already deep into Jung and already lecturing on it. And here you are. Now, it's kind of beautiful, actually, at what, 81 years old, being able to distill this vast, complex work that is really, really complicated and can be really dense. You're able to produce a book that's like, what, less than 150 pages that I think gives a really good overview and like what it means to depth psychology, which is really important. Like, okay, it's really interesting, it's weird and wonderful stuff, but you do a really good job of translating that into actually like, not even some lofty idea of an individuation, whatever that means, but like what it looks like in a life, what
Yeah.
transformation actually looks like. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. That's a good plug for the book.
Yeah,
And I like the word distillation a lot. Distillation is a good
very
word.
alchemical word, right? Come on.
Nice talking to you, Brian.
Yeah, take care. Have a nice
Take
evening.
care. Okay.
Bye bye.